They came out of deep space like a wall of iron and light. 300 Council warships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built, arranged in a perfect grid across the border of human-controlled territory. Their energy barriers linked together and formed a glowing curtain that stretched for millions of kilometers in every direction, sealing off every route in and out of human space. Dremok Kai stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Iron Decree, and watched the barrier snap into place on the tactical display. His stone-gray face showed no expression, but his orange eyes burned with satisfaction. He had waited years for this moment. The Council had always been too cautious, too slow, too willing to let small problems grow into large ones. But now they had listened. Now they had given him the authority to do what needed to be done. He opened a broadcast channel, wideband, all frequencies, so that every human colony, every station, every ship with a receiver would hear him. "People of Earth and its territories," he said, his voice flat and heavy. "This is General Dremok Kai of the Galactic Council Enforcement Fleet. By order of the Council, your species has been placed under containment. No vessel may enter or leave your designated space. You will disarm your military forces, surrender your shipyards, and accept Council supervision over your worlds. You have 30 of your planetary rotations to comply. If you do not, we will enforce compliance by other means. This is not a negotiation." The broadcast ended. Across 9 human worlds, billions of people heard the message. Some panicked, some were angry, some refused to believe it was real. The governments of Earth fractured into arguments within hours. Some leaders wanted to talk. Others wanted to fight. A few wanted to simply wait and hope it would go away. Nathan Perry did not have the luxury of hope. He had been given emergency authority over all human military forces, and he spent the first 3 days of the blockade in a constant state of motion, coordinating fleet positions, reinforcing colony defenses, and trying to hold together an alliance of nations that had been arguing with each other since long before the first humans set foot on another world. He called Danny Cole to the command bunker on the 4th day. Danny arrived with Katie Marsh at his side. They looked tired. Everyone looked tired. Perry laid it out plainly. The Council fleet outnumbered them by a staggering margin. Human ships were fast and well built, but they were smaller, lighter, and carried less firepower. In a straight fight, the math was brutal. The Council could lose half its fleet and still have enough ships to burn every human colony to ash. "We cannot win a war of numbers," Perry said, "so we do not fight that war. We fight a different one." Danny asked what he had in mind. Perry told him that for now, the priority was information. They needed to understand the blockade, its structure, its weaknesses, its supply lines. And they needed to open a channel to the Council, even if just to buy time. That was how Danny found himself aboard a diplomatic shuttle 3 days later, docked at a neutral relay station on the edge of the blockade line. Katie had told him it was a bad idea. Laura Voss, who had returned to the fleet after being expelled from Council space, told him it was the only idea. She dressed in her formal ambassador's uniform and carried nothing but a datapad and the kind of steady calm that came from years of sitting across tables from beings who considered her species barely worth talking to. Dremok Kai agreed to the meeting, though he made them wait for 6 hours before he appeared. When he finally arrived, flanked by 4 Vraxi soldiers in full battle armor, he did not sit down. He stood across the table from Laura and looked down at her the way someone might look at an insect that had crawled onto their meal. Laura spoke for 20 minutes. She talked about peace, cooperation, mutual respect, and the long history of species in the galaxy learning to coexist. She presented data showing that humanity's expansion posed no threat to any Council territory. She offered compromises, reduced fleet sizes, shared technology, open borders under council observation. Dremok Kai listened to all of it without moving. When she finished, he placed both of his massive hands flat on the table and leaned forward. "You misunderstand your position," he said. "The council does not negotiate with lesser species. You were given terms. You will meet them, or you will suffer the consequences. There is no third option." Laura held his gaze. She did not flinch, did not blink, did not look away. After a long silence, she nodded once, picked up her datapad, and walked out. On the shuttle ride back to the Vanguard, she sat in silence for a long time. Danny waited. Finally, she turned to him and said, "Diplomacy is over. Whatever comes next, it will not be solved with words." Danny believed her. While the diplomatic effort played out at the blockade line, something far more dangerous was unfolding in the shadows. Megan Holt had been operating undercover inside council space for nearly 2 years. She was an intelligence officer with a talent for disappearing into places she was not supposed to be. She had forged identities, learned 3 alien languages, and built a network of contacts among the lower-ranking species that served the council. When the blockade was announced, Megan went to ground and started digging. Something about the operation did not add up. The council had been watching humanity for decades and had never shown this level of aggression. Something had changed, and it was not just the warning from Ethon. She found her answer in a classified military file buried in a Vraxi intelligence archive. It took her 6 days to crack the encryption. When she read what was inside, her hands went cold. The containment was a cover. Dramakai's real objective had nothing to do with controlling humanity. He wanted access to a region of space called the Hollow, a forbidden zone that bordered human territory and had been sealed off by council decree for longer than any living species could remember. Ancient records, most of them incomplete, described the Hollow as a place of immense power. Something was locked inside it, something that Aethon itself had put there. Dremok Kai believed it was a weapon. The file described his plan in careful detail. The blockade would keep humanity contained and distracted. While the main fleet held the line, a secondary force of 50 ships would slip through the chaos and make for the Hollow. They would breach the ancient seal and claim whatever was inside. With that power, Dremok Kai would not need the council. He would not need anyone. Megan encrypted her findings and transmitted them on a narrow-beam signal aimed at the nearest human relay station. The message bounced through 3 hidden nodes before it reached Admiral Perry's desk. Perry read it and felt the ground shift beneath him. This was no longer a blockade. This was not even a war over territory. This was something much older and much more dangerous, and the humans were caught in the middle of it. He called Danny Cole immediately. "Forget the blockade for now," Perry said. "We have a bigger problem." Meanwhile, deep in the engineering bay of the USS Vanguard, Sam Briggs was not sleeping. He had not slept in 3 days, and he had no plans to start. The chief engineer was surrounded by disassembled sensor arrays, energy coils, and about 40 empty coffee cups. He had been studying the Council's energy barrier since the blockade went up, running every scan the Vanguard's instruments could manage, and he had found something. It was a network of overlapping energy fields, each generated by a different ship and synced together at a specific harmonic frequency. If he could build a device that broadcast a counter-frequency, a disruptor tuned to exactly the right wavelength, it would create a brief gap in the barrier. Not a big gap, and not for long. Maybe 90 seconds, maybe less, but it would be a hole. He brought his findings to Danny. Katie Marsh looked at the rough schematics and said it was insane. Sam said he agreed, but it would work. Perry authorized the project and sent every spare part and resource he could scrape together to the Vanguard. Sam Briggs went back to his engineering bay, rolled up his sleeves, and got to work. Outside the barrier, the Council fleet waited. The clock continued to count down. 28 days remained. And somewhere, in the cold silence between the stars, The ancient seal on the hollow sat undisturbed, holding back something that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time. Part 3. The Breach. Sam Briggs finished the disruptor on the 26th day. It was not pretty. It looked like someone had ripped the guts out of 3 different machines and welded them together in a fever dream. Cables ran across the outer hull of the Vanguard where they had no business being. The mounting brackets were still warm. The whole thing hummed at a frequency that made people's teeth itch when they stood too close to it. But when Sam ran the test in a sealed bay using a small-scale replica of the Council's barrier frequency, the device punched a clean hole through the energy field for exactly 93 seconds before burning out its primary coil. He replaced the coil with a heavier one, reinforced the housing, and told Danny Cole it was ready. Danny gathered his senior crew in the briefing room. Katie Marsh, Sam Briggs, Laura Voss, Kevin Drake, and Tessa Quinn sat around the table while Danny laid out the plan. They were not going to fight the blockade. They did not have the ships or the firepower for that. What they were going to do was break through it at a single point, fast enough and loud enough to send a message that every species in the galaxy would hear. Humanity was not going to sit behind a wall and wait to be told what to do. Perry had scraped together 12 fast corvettes, small nimble ships built for speed rather than firepower. They would fly in formation with the Vanguard, hit the barrier at its thinnest point, slip through the gap created by the disruptor, and scatter into open space on the other side. The goal was not to destroy the blockade. The goal was to prove it could be broken. Katie Marsh had identified the weak point, a section of the barrier near a dense asteroid field where the Council ships were spread slightly thinner than the rest of the line. The asteroids would provide cover for the approach. If they timed it right, they could reach the barrier before the Council even knew they were there. Kevin Drake cracked his knuckles and asked what happened if the disruptor failed. Danny told him that was not an option. Kevin nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable answer. Tessa Quinn, the ship's medic, said nothing during the briefing. Afterward, she found Danny alone in the corridor outside and told him quietly that she had prepped the medical bay for mass casualties. She hoped she would not need it. Danny looked at her and said he hoped the same thing, but that she should prepare anyway. Tessa nodded and went back to her work. The strike fleet launched at midnight, ship time. 13 vessels running dark. No active sensors, no communications, no engine flares visible beyond a few hundred meters. Katie Marsh coordinated the formation from her station on the Vanguard's bridge, guiding them through the asteroid field using passive scans and memorized navigation charts. The asteroids were enormous, some of them the size of small moons, tumbling slowly in the endless dark. The corvettes threaded between them like fish moving through a coral reef. Nobody spoke. The only sound on the bridge was the soft hum of the instruments and the occasional click of Katie adjusting the course. It took 4 hours to cross the asteroid field. When they emerged on the other side, the Council's energy barrier filled the viewport, a shimmering wall of pale blue light that stretched from one edge of visible space to the other. Behind it, they could see the dark shapes of Council warships holding position, their running lights blinking in slow patterns. Danny stood up from his chair and looked at the barrier. It was beautiful, in a terrible kind of way. A wall built to cage an entire species. "Sam," he said over the intercom, "light it up." In the engineering day, Sam Briggs took a breath, whispered something to himself that might have been a prayer or might have been a curse, and activated the disruptor. The device screamed to life. A beam of energy lanced out from the Vanguard's hull and struck the barrier. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the blue light flickered. It rippled like the surface of a pond struck by a stone, and a gap opened, a dark, ragged hole in the wall of light, just wide enough for a ship to pass through. "Go," Danny said. The vanguard surged forward. Behind it, the 12 corvettes lit their engines and followed. They hit the gap at full speed, one after another, burning through the opening like sparks flying through a crack in a furnace door. The Council fleet reacted almost immediately. Alarms blared across the blockade line. Ships began to turn. Weapons powered up. Drema Kai aboard the Iron Decree received the alert and slammed his fist against the arm of his command chair hard enough to crack the metal. "How?" he snarled. His tactical officer did not have an answer. The gap in the barrier held for 87 seconds. The Vanguard and 10 of the 12 corvettes made it through before it collapsed. 2 corvettes were caught in the closing edge of the barrier. One was thrown sideways and tumbled into the asteroid field, its hull cracked, but its crew alive. The other was not so lucky. The barrier snapped shut through its midsection, and the ship broke apart in a flash of white light. On the other side, the surviving ships scattered. Katie Marsh had planned this part carefully. Each corvette had a different escape vector, fanning out in 12 directions so that the Council pursuit ships could not chase them all. The Council warships poured through the gaps in their own barrier and gave chase, but the human corvettes were faster in a straight line. 3 more were caught and destroyed. 2 were crippled and their crews captured. But the Vanguard and the remaining 7 corvettes broke free into open space. Danny stood on the bridge and watched the Council ships fall behind on the sensor display. His heart was pounding. His hands were steady. "Open a channel," he said. "All frequencies. Wide broadcast." Katie opened the channel. Danny spoke. "This is Captain Danny Cole of the USS Vanguard. We have breached the Council blockade. To every human colony, every station, every ship that can hear me, the wall is not unbreakable. They told us to sit down and be quiet. We chose to stand up. We are still standing." He paused. "To the Galactic Council, we did not ask for this fight, but we will not run from it. If you want to talk, we will talk. If you want to push, we will push back. And if you think a wall of light and 300 ships is enough to hold us, you have not been paying attention." The broadcast went out across every open frequency in the region. Human colonies heard it. Council ships heard it. Neutral species monitoring the situation from a safe distance heard it. And in the quiet places of the galaxy, where civilizations watched and waited and calculated their next moves, something shifted. The Pelori, a trading species that had remained carefully neutral, sent a private message to Earth's government expressing interest in opening back-channel communications. The Dothrani, who had laughed at Aethon's warning in the Council chamber, quietly recalled their ships from the blockade fleet and replaced them with automated drones. Even among the Council's own members, doubt began to spread. If 13 human ships and a piece of equipment built from scrap could punch a hole in a Council blockade, what would happen when the humans built something better? Drema Kai did not share these doubts. He saw the breach not as a warning, but as an insult. He stood before the Council via secure holographic link and demanded authorization for a full military invasion of human space. No more containment, no more waiting. He wanted to go in with everything the Council had and end this before the humans could adapt further. Valith Sorn hesitated. The High Arbiter still remembered Aethon's warning, still felt the weight of the primordial entity's sorrow pressing against his mind. He argued for restraint. He said that the breach proved that humans were resourceful, and that resourcefulness should be respected, not crushed. Drema Kai called him a coward. The insult landed like a blow. The chamber went quiet. The vote was held. It was close, closer than anyone expected. But in the end, fear won again, as it so often did. The invasion was approved. Drema Kai smiled for the first time anyone could remember. It was not a pleasant sight. He began assembling the largest military fleet the galaxy had seen in 10,000 years. over 1,000 warships from 6 different species, carrying enough firepower to shatter moons and boil oceans. They gathered at the edge of the blockade line and waited for the order to advance. Back on the Vanguard, now docked at a hidden repair station deep inside an asteroid belt, Danny Cole sat alone in his quarters and looked at a photograph pinned to the wall above his desk. It was a picture of Earth taken from orbit, blue and white and green, impossibly small against the black. Katie knocked and entered without waiting. She told him the council had voted. The invasion was coming. Danny looked at the photograph for a long moment. "Then we had better be ready," he said. Katie nodded. "We will be." Neither of them fully believed it, but they said it anyway, because that was what humans did. They said the impossible thing, and then they went out and tried to make it true. Part 4. The War for the Hollow. The invasion hit human space like a hammer striking glass. Over 1,000 council warships crossed the blockade line on the same day, splitting into 3 massive assault groups that drove toward the most populated human systems. Their weapons lit up the dark between the stars with beams of energy that could cut through a planet's crust. Their shields could absorb punishment that would have vaporized anything the humans had ever built. Dremok Kai expected it to be over in days. He had studied humanity's military capacity, counted their ships, measured their weapons, and run the numbers through every tactical model the Vraxi had ever developed. The result was always the same. Humanity would resist briefly, suffer catastrophic losses, and then surrender. Every species in the galaxy eventually surrendered when the math turned against them. It was a law of nature, as far as Dremok Kai was concerned. He was wrong. The first assault group targeted the Kepler colonies, 3 human worlds in a system rich with resources and close to the blockade line. The Council fleet arrived expecting to face a defensive line of human warships. Instead, they found empty space. No ships, no stations, nothing but silence and the cold light of a yellow star. The Vraxi commander leading the assault group ordered his ships deeper into the system. They moved cautiously, scanning for traps. They found nothing. The 3 colonies appeared undefended. The commander began to relax. That was when the asteroids started shooting. Human engineers had spent the weeks before the invasion hollowing out dozens of large asteroids in the system's outer belt, and filling them with weapons platforms, sensor arrays, and enough missiles to darken the sky. When the Council fleet moved past the belt and committed to their approach toward the colonies, the asteroids opened fire from behind. The first volley destroyed 11 Council ships before they could raise their shields. The second volley crippled 20 more. The assault group wheeled around to face the threat, and while they were turning, a fleet of 60 human warships emerged from behind the system's gas giant and hit them from the opposite side. It was not a victory. The Council ships were still stronger, still better armed, still harder to kill. But the humans fought with a viciousness and a willingness to take damage that the Council had never encountered. Human ships rammed Council vessels when their weapons failed. Damaged corvettes flew directly into the paths of enemy torpedoes to shield larger ships behind them. Crews stayed at their posts and kept firing even as their hulls burned and their atmosphere vented into space. The Council took the Kepler system, but it cost them 94 ships and took 3 weeks instead of 3 days. And while they were fighting for Kepler, human fleets struck at their supply lines, hitting convoy after convoy with fast raids that came from nowhere and vanished before the Council escorts could respond. This pattern repeated across every front. Nathan Perry had studied every guerrilla war in human history and adapted those lessons for space combat. He did not try to hold territory. He made the Council pay for every system, every station, every scrap of empty space they tried to claim. Human fleets hid in nebulae, in the radiation shadows of pulsars, in the gravitational wells of gas giants, where Council sensors had trouble seeing. They struck, caused damage, and retreated before the enemy could bring their full strength to bear. Perry moved his command station every 12 hours, jumping from system to system aboard a converted freighter that looked like a piece of junk from the outside, but carried the most advanced communications equipment humanity had ever built. He slept in 2-hour intervals and ate whatever was put in front of him without looking at it. His officers worried about him. He told them to worry about the war instead. Danny Cole and the USS Vanguard became the tip of the spear. Perry used them as a rapid response unit, sending them wherever the line was about to collapse. Danny and Katie Marsh would arrive at a system under siege, assess the situation in minutes, and throw the Vanguard into the thickest part of the fight. They were outnumbered in every engagement. They won some and lost others, but they always made the Council bleed before they withdrew. Katie developed a tactic that the Council commanders had no answer for. She called it a snare. A small group of human ships would engage a larger Council force and fight hard enough to seem like a real threat, taking losses and burning through their ammunition. Then they would begin to retreat, slowly, drawing the enemy forward. The Council ships, sensing weakness, would pursue, and they would run directly into a second, hidden group of human ships that had been waiting in silence with their engines cold and their weapons armed. The snare worked because it relied on something the Council could not understand. The bait group had to genuinely fight and genuinely suffer. They had to take real damage and lose real ships. No other species in the galaxy was willing to sacrifice their own people just to lure an enemy into a trap. Not because they did not value their lives, but because they understood that sometimes the only way to protect what mattered was to put everything on the line. The Council's advance slowed. Systems that should have fallen in days held for weeks. Dremok Kai grew frustrated. He pushed his commanders harder, demanded faster results, and began to make mistakes. While the main war raged across human space, Megan Holt's intelligence had reached Perry, and he understood the real threat. Dremok Kai had detached 50 ships from the main fleet and sent them on a quiet course toward the Hollow, the forbidden region of space where something ancient waited behind a seal that had stood since before recorded history. The war against humanity was a distraction. The real prize was whatever lay inside the Hollow. Perry called Danny on a secure channel and told him everything. Danny listened in silence, then asked how many ships Perry could spare for an intercept mission. Perry paused for a long time before answering. "1," he said. "I can spare 1. I am sorry, Danny. Every other ship I have is holding a line somewhere. If I pull even a single squadron, a colony falls." Danny looked at Katie. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Danny told Perry they would handle it. Sam Briggs had been expecting this. He had already upgraded the disruptor into a more powerful version and had been running modifications on the Vanguard's engines in every spare moment between battles. He told Danny he could push the engines into a sustained overburn that would nearly double their speed, but the stress on the hull and the crew would be severe. The acceleration alone would put people on the floor. Sustained exposure could cause internal bleeding, ruptured blood vessels, and bone fractures. Tessa Quinn heard this and started preparing. She filled the medical bay with pressure suits, pain medication, and emergency surgical kits. She rigged acceleration couches in every corridor so crew members who collapsed could be strapped down without being thrown around. She told Danny that she would keep everyone alive, but she could not promise they would enjoy the experience. The Vanguard detached from the main fleet and burned hard for the Hollow. The acceleration pressed the crew into their seats like a giant hand pushing them down. Some threw up, some passed out. Tessa moved through the ship with a bag of supplies and steady hands, treating the worst cases and keeping everyone functional. They arrived at the edge of the Hollow in 19 hours. What they found stopped everyone on the bridge, mid-breath. It hung in space like a wall built by something that thought in distances measured by light years. It was made of a material that no scanner could identify, dark, smooth, and covered in symbols that pulsed with a faint inner light. The symbols were old. Not old like ruins or fossils, old like the universe itself had written them. And in front of the seal, Dremok Kai's secret fleet of 50 warships was arranged in a bombardment formation, pouring energy into the ancient structure. Cracks of light were already spreading across its surface. Danny looked at the fleet. 50 ships against 1. He opened a channel to Kevin Drake in the Marine Bay. "Sergeant Drake, get your team suited up. We are going to board the flagship." Kevin grinned, though nobody could see it, through his helmet. "Thought you would never ask, sir." The Vanguard dove straight into the formation, weaving between enemy ships at a speed that should have been impossible for a vessel its size. Sam Briggs was at the engine controls, manually adjusting thrust vectors in real time, keeping the ship alive through sheer skill and stubbornness. Council ships fired on them from every direction. The Vanguard shields took hit after hit, flashing and flickering, but holding. They reached the Iron Decree, and Danny brought the Vanguard alongside with a maneuver that scraped the paint off both hulls. Kevin Drake and his Marines blasted through the airlock with breaching charges and poured into the enemy ship. The fighting inside was brutal. Vraxi soldiers were bigger, stronger, and covered in natural armor that could stop a bullet. Kevin's team fought them with everything they had: rifles, grenades, blades, and bare hands when nothing else worked. They moved room by room, corridor by corridor, stepping over bodies and through smoke. Kevin took a plasma burn to his left shoulder that melted through his armor and scorched the skin underneath. He gritted his teeth, shifted his rifle to his other hand, and kept moving. They reached the command deck. Kevin kicked the door open and found Dremok Kai standing behind his tactical console, his orange eyes burning with fury. Kevin raised his weapon and aimed it at the general's head. Dremok Kai did not flinch. He looked at Kevin with something that might have been respect or might have been disgust. "You are too late," the general said. "Even if you stop me, the council will send more. We will keep coming until your species is dust." Kevin held the weapon steady. His shoulder was screaming. Blood was running down his arm, inside the suit. He looked at the general and spoke in a voice that was calm and even and absolutely certain. "Every species that has ever tried to put us down has failed. You will not be any different." He gave the order. His team secured the deck. The bombardment stopped. The seal held, barely. Hairline cracks of light still glowed across its surface, and the symbols pulsed in patterns that felt wrong, like a heartbeat that had been knocked off rhythm. But it held. Danny Cole stood on the bridge of the Vanguard and stared at the ancient structure through the viewport. He did not know what was behind it. He did not know what they had just saved. But the cold feeling in his chest told him that this was far from over. Part 5. The Primordial Speaks Again. The news of Dremok Kai's capture spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within hours, every species with a ship or a sensor or even a basic radio receiver knew what had happened. A single human warship had fought through 50 council vessels and taken the most feared general in the galaxy prisoner aboard his own flagship. The story was impossible, and it was true. And that combination shook the foundations of everything the galaxy believed about power. The Council's invasion force, already bleeding from weeks of grinding warfare against an enemy that refused to behave the way enemies were supposed to behave, began to crack. The Dothrani pulled their remaining ships out entirely and sent a formal apology to Earth's government. The Pelinax suspended their participation and demanded an emergency review of the invasion mandate. 2 more species followed within days. The Great Fleet that had crossed into human space with over 1,000 warships was now barely holding together with 600, and morale was falling faster than the numbers. Valeth's sword watched it all unravel from his chambers aboard the council station. He had known this would happen. He had felt it in his bones from the moment Aethon had appeared in the Great Hall and spoken those words. Never challenge them. He had argued against the blockade, argued against the invasion, and been overruled each time by voices louder and more confident than his own. Now those voices were silent, and the mess was his to clean up. He issued a ceasefire order. All council forces were to hold position and await further instructions. No more offensive operations, no more colony strikes. The war was paused, though it was not yet over. But the universe, it seemed, was not finished with them. 3 days after the ceasefire, the sensors at the Hollow went wild. The ancient seal, weakened by the bombardment from Dremok Kai's fleet, had begun to fracture. The cracks that Kevin Drake and his Marines had fought so hard to stop from spreading were growing again, slowly but steadily. Energy readings spiked to levels that no instrument in human or council space was designed to measure. Something behind the seal was pushing, testing, pressing against the barrier like a hand pushing against a door that had been locked for 1,000,000 years. Danny Cole was still at the Hollow with the Vanguard. He had refused to leave, even after Perry ordered him to bring the ship home for repairs. Something told him to stay. He could not explain it, and did not try. When the cracks began to widen, he sent a message to Perry. Harry sent it to the council. The ceasefire suddenly felt very small. And then Aethon returned. It appeared at the Hollow itself, manifesting in the space between the damaged seal and the scattered remains of Dremok Kai's fleet. Its form was larger than before, a vast, swirling cloud of light and shadow that stretched across thousands of kilometers. Every ship in the area, human and council alike, felt the pressure of its presence, like a weight on the chest, like gravity pulling sideways, like a voice whispering at the edge of hearing. Aethon spoke to everyone at once. Not just the ships at the Hollow, but every mind within 1,000 light years. Council members in their chambers, human soldiers at their posts, civilians on colonies and stations and worlds. All of them heard the primordial entity, and all of them understood. The Hollow does not contain a weapon. Dremok Kai, held in a cell aboard the Vanguard, heard this and went still. The Hollow is a prison. Long before your civilizations existed, long before your species drew breath. Not a war of ships and soldiers, but a war between beings like me, entities born in the first moments of this universe. Some of us believed in nurturing the life that was beginning to grow across the stars. Others believed that life was a mistake, a disorder, something to be erased and replaced with perfect silence. We fought. We won. The ones who wanted silence were sealed inside this place, bound by a structure designed to hold for eternity. And it would have held if it had been left alone. Danny stood on the bridge and felt the weight of those words settle into his bones. Beside him, Katie Marsh gripped the edge of her console with white knuckles. Sam Briggs, listening from the engineering bay, sat down slowly in his chair and stared at the wall. Aethon continued. The bombardment has weakened the seal beyond my ability to repair it alone. I am old. I am diminished. The ones inside are waking, and they are pushing against the cracks. If the seal fails, they will emerge, and they will do what they always intended to do. They will erase everything. A silence followed that was heavier than any sound. Then Aethon said the thing that changed everything. I gave the council my warning, not because humanity was dangerous in a way you should fear, but because humanity is the only species in this galaxy capable of doing what must now be done. I have watched civilizations for longer than your stars have burned. Every one of them, when faced with certain destruction, chose to retreat, to bargain, to accept their fate. Every single one, except the humans. They do not stop. They do not surrender. They fight against the impossible, not because they believe they will win, but because they refuse to accept any other option. That stubbornness, that refusal to break, is the only force that can hold the seal together while I rebuild it. Danny felt the eyes of every person on the bridge turn to him. He did not look at them. He looked at the seal through the viewport, at the cracks of light spreading across its ancient surface, and he understood. "What do you need us to do?" he asked. Athon explained. Human ships would need to physically anchor themselves to the structure of the seal and channel their reactor energy into it. They would become living supports, holding the barrier in place while Athon rewove the bindings that had been torn apart. The process would be painful. The entities inside would fight back. They could not reach through the seal with their bodies, but they could reach through with their minds, a psychic pressure designed to break the will of anyone who stood against them. The humans would have to endure that pressure, while keeping their reactors running and their ships locked to the seal. It might take hours, it might cost lives, and there was no guarantee it would work. Danny opened a channel to every human ship in range. There were over 200 of them. Warships, transports, medical frigates, even a few civilian vessels that had followed the fleet. He did not give an order. He simply told them what Athon had said and what was needed, and then asked for volunteers. For a moment, there was silence on the channel. Then the first response came in. Then the second. Then a flood. Every single ship volunteered. Every one. Katie Marsh looked at the communications board, at the names scrolling across the screen, and something shifted in her expression. Something fierce and proud and quiet, all at once. The human fleet moved into position around the seal. Ships of every size locked their docking clamps onto the ancient structure and began pouring energy from their reactors into the failing barrier. The effect was immediate. The cracks stopped spreading. The light steadied. The seal held. And then the pressure came. It started as a headache, a dull throb behind the eyes that grew sharper with every passing minute. Then it became something worse, a voice, or something like a voice, whispering in the back of every mind. It told them to stop. It told them it was pointless. It told them they were small and weak and finite, and that nothing they did would ever matter. It reached into their memories and pulled out every failure, every loss, every moment of doubt and shame and fear, and held those moments up like mirrors. Crew members collapsed at their stations. Some screamed, some wept. On the Vanguard, a young officer named Peter Grant fell to his knees on the bridge and pressed his hands against his temples. Katie Marsh knelt beside him, put her hand on his shoulder, and told him to hold on. He looked at her with bloodshot eyes and nodded. Tessa Quinn moved between ships on an emergency shuttle, docking wherever the casualties were worst, treating people who were bleeding from their noses and ears, people whose blood vessels had burst under the combined strain of reactor feedback and psychic assault. She did not stop moving for the entire 9 hours. Later, she would not be able to remember most of it. Her body simply kept going because stopping was not an option. Sam Briggs realized at the 4-hour mark that the energy output was not enough. The seal needed more. He made a decision without consulting anyone. He rerouted the Vanguard's life support systems, weapons, shields, and every non-essential system into the energy feed. The ship went dark, except for the reactor and the bridge lights. Other engineers across the fleet saw what he had done and followed his lead. For 9 hours, the human fleet held the line. They held it against something older than their sun, something that hated them with a patience and a depth that no mortal mind could fully comprehend. They held it while their ships burned out and their bodies failed, and the voice in their heads told them over and over that they were nothing, and they did not let go. In the 9th hour, Athon finished its work. The ancient bindings rewove themselves around the seal. The cracks closed, the light faded, the whispering stopped, and a silence fell across the hollow that was not empty, but full of something that felt like the universe itself, letting out a breath it had been holding for 1,000,000 years. Danny Cole sat in his chair on the dark, cold bridge of the Vanguard and stared at the sealed hollow through the viewport. The symbols glowed steadily, their rhythm restored. Beside him, Katie was slumped in her chair, exhausted, her face pale, but her eyes open. Peter Grant was still on the floor, but he was breathing. Sam's voice crackled over the intercom from the engineering bay, hoarse and barely audible. "Reactors stable. Life support coming back online. We made it." Aethon turned its vast awareness toward the gathered fleets, human and council ships that had arrived during the crisis, watching in stunned silence. It spoke one final time. "I told you never to challenge them. Not because they would destroy you, but because the galaxy would need them, and you nearly ruined everything." Valeth Sorn, listening from the council station, closed his 4 eyes and lowered his head. The ceasefire became a permanent peace. The council formally dissolved the containment order and the invasion directive. Every charge against humanity was dropped. In a ceremony held aboard the council station, Laura Voss, released from custody after Dremok Kai's arrest, accepted a full seat on the council on behalf of Earth. She wore the same ambassador's uniform she had worn the day they expelled her, and she stood straight and tall, and her voice did not shake. Nathan Perry watched the ceremony on a view screen aboard his battered command ship. He allowed himself a small smile, the first in months, and then turned back to his work. There was rebuilding to do. Kevin Drake sat in the mess hall of the Vanguard with his Marines. His shoulder was still bandaged, his arm in a sling. Nobody spoke. They just sat together, eating bad food from metal trays, alive and aware of what that meant. Megan Holt was recovered from Vraxi custody as part of the peace terms. She was thin and covered in bruises, but she walked off the transport shuttle under her own power. She stepped onto the deck of a human station, looked out through the viewport at the stars, and said quietly to no one in particular, "I knew you would come." Danny Cole brought the Vanguard to the nearest repair station. The ship was barely holding together. Half its systems were dead. The hull was scarred with plasma burns and impact craters. When the docking clamps engaged, the whole vessel groaned like it was grateful to finally stop moving. Katie told him the ship might never fly again. Danny put his hand flat against the bulkhead, felt the faint vibration of the reactors still running beneath the metal, and said, "She did what she needed to do. So did we." In the quiet of space, far from the stations and the fleets, and the worlds full of people rebuilding their lives, Aethon drifted alone, near the sealed hollow. The primordial entity was smaller now, dimmer, its light flickering like a candle, nearing the end of its wick. The effort of rebuilding the seal had cost it dearly. It might rest for another 10,000 years before it had the strength to speak again. But as it drifted, it thought about the humans, this strange, small, stubborn species that bled and broke and kept going anyway. It had watched life grow across the galaxy since the beginning of time. It had seen wonders and horrors beyond counting, but it had never seen anything quite like them. Perhaps, after all these ages, the universe had finally made something worth believing in. Aethon dimmed its light and settled into the silence between the stars. Part 1. The Warning Ignored. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had not been this full in over 1,000 years. Representatives from all 12 elder species sat in their elevated seats, arranged in a wide circle beneath a ceiling made of living crystal that shifted colors with the mood of the room. Right now, it glowed a deep, uneasy blue. Something had called them here. Not a message, not a signal, but a feeling, a pull deep inside the mind of every council member that dragged them from their worlds and their duties and placed them in this ancient chamber on the station at the center of known space. They all knew what it meant. There was only one being in the galaxy that could reach into the thoughts of so many at once. Aethon had returned. The air in the center of the hall began to shimmer. Light gathered from nowhere, folding over itself in ribbons of gold and deep violet. The temperature dropped. And then Aethon was there. Not a body, not a shape anyone could name, but a presence so vast and heavy that every soul in the room felt their breath catch in their chest. Aethon was older than most of the stars that the council species called home. It existed between dimensions, slipping through the fabric of space like a hand moving through still water. It had been there when the first civilizations rose. It had watched empires stretch across galaxies and crumble into dust. And it had not spoken to the council in 6,000 years. Until now. It did not use words. It never had. Instead, meaning poured directly into every mind in the chamber, clear, heavy, and impossible to misunderstand. There is a species on the outer spiral arm. They are young. They are loud. They fight among themselves with a fury that would embarrass most predators. And you must never, under any circumstance, challenge them. Valeth Sorn, the High Arbiter of the Council, rose from his seat. He was tall even by the standards of his own insectoid species, his segmented body draped in the white robes of his office. His voice was calm when he spoke, though his 4 hands trembled slightly at his sides. "Great Aethon," he said, "we are honored by your presence. But we must ask, which species do you speak of? The outer spiral arm holds dozens of developing worlds." Aethon answered not with words, but with a vision. Every mind in the room was suddenly somewhere else. They saw a small blue planet, third from a modest yellow star. They saw oceans and green land and cities that stretched across the surface like veins of silver and glass. They saw the creatures that lived there, soft-bodied, endlessly busy, building and breaking and building again. They saw wars that burned whole continents. They saw those same creatures, scarred and bleeding, pick themselves up and reach for the sky. They saw rockets. They saw stations. They saw a ship punch through the light barrier for the first time and tumble into the wider galaxy like a newborn animal taking its first steps. Humans. The vision faded. The council members blinked and stirred. A murmur ran through the hall. Draymond Kai was the first to laugh. He was a general of the Vraxi, a species built for war, broad, armored, with a face like cracked stone, and eyes that burned a dull orange. He sat in the military section of the council and commanded more warships than most species had cities. He had crushed rebellions, ended territorial disputes, and personally led the destruction of 2 civilizations that had refused to submit to council authority. "Humans," he said, his voice booming across the hall, "you come to us after 6,000 years of silence to warn us about humans? They have been in space for barely 2 of their generations. They have no fleet worth mentioning. Their technology is crude. They cannot even stop fighting each other long enough to form a proper government." Several other representatives joined in the laughter. The Dothari ambassador clicked his beak in amusement. The Pelanax delegate shook her long head. Aethon did not react to the laughter. It simply pulsed once with a light so deep and sorrowful that the laughter died on its own. The primordial entity let the silence hang for a long moment, and then it projected one final message into the room. "You do not understand what they are. I have watched life grow across this galaxy for longer than your species have had names. I have seen 10,000 civilizations rise. Every single one of them, when pushed to the edge, chose to survive by surrendering, fleeing, or negotiating. Every single one, except them. Humans do not stop. They do not bend. They break themselves apart and put themselves back together and keep going. You have never faced anything like them, and I pray you never have to. Do not challenge them." Then Aethon was gone. The light folded inward and vanished. The crystal ceiling flickered back to life, glowing a pale and uncertain yellow. The hall sat in silence for a long time. Valeth Sorn was the first to speak. He suggested that the council heed the warning and continue to observe humanity from a distance, as they had been doing for decades. There was no reason to provoke a confrontation. Dremok Kai stood and disagreed. He argued that humanity was expanding too fast. They had already colonized 9 worlds and were pushing toward a 10th. Their ships were getting faster. Their population was growing. If the council waited, the humans would become harder to manage. The time to act was now, while they were still small. He proposed a containment action, a military blockade around all human-controlled space. No ships in, no ships out. If the humans cooperated, they would be allowed to continue living under council supervision. If they resisted, they would be dealt with. The debate lasted 3 days. Valeth Sorn argued for patience. Dremok Kai argued for strength. In the end, fear won. The council voted to approve the blockade. Laura Voss had been standing outside the chamber the entire time. She was Earth's ambassador to the council, a tall woman with short brown hair and sharp green eyes, who had spent the last 4 years learning the languages, customs, and politics of species that had been traveling the stars since before humanity learned to use fire. She had earned a grudging respect from several council members, but that respect meant nothing now. When the vote was announced, 2 Vraxi guards escorted her from the station. She was given a small diplomatic shuttle and told to return to human space immediately. As the shuttle pulled away from the station, Laura opened an encrypted channel and sent a message to Earth on the tightest beam she could manage. The message was short. Containment approved. Blockade incoming. Prepare for the worst. On Earth, in a bunker buried deep beneath the waves of the Atlantic Ocean, Admiral Nathan Perry read the message twice. He was 63 years old, retired, and had been spending his days fishing off the coast of Virginia. He had hoped he would never see the inside of this bunker again. He picked up a secure line and made one call. On the other end, aboard the USS Vanguard, somewhere near the border of human space, Captain Danny Cole answered. "Captain Cole," Perry said, "I need you to come home, right now." Danny looked through the bridge viewport at the stars and felt something cold settle in his chest. He had been a soldier long enough to know what that tone meant. "How bad?" he asked. "The worst kind," Perry said. "They are coming, and they think we will not fight back." Danny ended the call and turned to his first officer, Katie Marsh, who was already watching him from her station, with a look that said she had heard enough. "Set a course for Earth," Danny said. "Maximum speed." The Vanguard turned and burned hard for home, and the stars blurred into lines around it.